Good morning and welcome to Prime Media Broadcasting's webinar on the auto and travel industry. My name is Umesh Lathar and I'm coming to you live today from the KFM studios. I managed to kick Darren, Shellen and Subs out and commandeer their studios for our webinar today. We'd like to welcome a number of people joining us today, some of our panelists or some of our panelists here, as well as some of our media people, our advertising agencies, and people within the industry as well. So welcome to Danica from Travel Check, dialing in all the way from Germany, Aileen from No Menu, lovely to see you online. Today we're going to talk about the automotive industry and the travel industry. So it's been a really tough time for both the sectors. People never needed their cars during the hard lockdown, which meant everybody's batteries were flat and your car didn't have much use. But with that being said, you had a lot of time at home to consider the purchase of a new car registered in 2021. So we'll talk a little bit about that and then look at the travel industry. Now that we're able to get into the travel industry, we're able to travel, our borders are open. It was quite a surprise when everything opened quite quickly. So how can we use that to our advantage? We're going to talk about what our listeners think about travel at the moment. What are their feelings about the automotive industry? But before we go there, we're going to pop a poll on the screen. And while the poll comes up, I'm going to introduce some of our team panelists today. Firstly, Deborah Skierpers, our Chief Strategy Officer. Deborah's online to moderate and also to field any of the questions that you have to ask today. Deborah, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, Amish. Lovely to be here and welcome to everyone who's joined us.
And then from our insights and research team, we have the lovely Kagiso and Melissa Mcnally. Melissa Mcnally is a favorite on our panel. She's well known in the industry currently for being the Dorian on research at Prime Media Broadcasting. So Melissa, lovely to have you here this afternoon. Sorry, it's Cape Town time this morning.
Thank you, Amish, and welcome to everybody as well. Thank you for being here.
And Kagiso, I think we're having a bit of a technical issue there. We couldn't see Kagiso. She looked a little bit ghosty. Oh, there we go. Kagiso, welcome as well. Lovely to have you. So we're going to put a poll up the screen and we're going to ask you a few questions about where you are currently. Are you traveling on holiday this season? And if so, where to? Yes, local. Yes, international, no staying at home. Honestly, I would rather be in Mauritius this holiday season, but I was just thinking about it. 14 days quarantine in Mauritius. If only they had a reasonable package, I would love to do 14 days quarantine on the beach. Tell us about your destination. Are you going to the beach, the bush, or the berg? Family and friends. And which province offers the most value for money during these times? Is it the Western Cape, KZN, or other? I think the one should have been Eastern Cape, but it's fine. Western Cape, KZN, or other. Submit your answers now, and when the poll's over, we'll be able to tell you exactly what people are thinking. Well, our purpose of today is to actually try and encourage the advertising fraternity to look at the auto industry and the travel industry from the research that we have currently planned. Melissa's been working very hard with our Prime Connect panel, which is a respondent survey base of 10,000 people of our Prime Media radio stations, which is 947 in Johannesburg, 702 KFM and Cape Talk. And with that, Melissa's extensively looked at level 5, 4, 3, 2, and now going into 1. Before we hand over to Melissa, let's have a look at the poll and see what people are currently doing. Are you going to be going to the beach? Yes. Local, no staying at home. That's almost 50-50. Your destination is going to the beach. That's very, very strong at 44%. And family and friends at 50%. It's quite interesting, Melissa. Family and friends comes up high in our poll. And Melissa has some great insights about where people are actually going to over the festive period. Mm-hmm. Western Cape came up quite highly, and other provinces and KZN coming in quite close second. Well, it's very interesting because some of the information that we have on the poll actually mirrors what Melissa's research has been saying with our 10,000 respondent panel. So let me introduce you without any further ado, Melissa Mcnally, who's been with us for a number of years. She is well known in the research and insights fraternity in South Africa. She is brilliant at what she does, and she loves questions. And I think I always throw her in a curveball now and then, but to present to you what our listeners believe and what our listeners currently feel in the automotive and travel insights industry, please welcome Melissa Mcnally.
Thank you so much, Omesh, and thank you to everybody for being here today. And as Omesh mentioned, we have actually been in contact with our listeners throughout the whole lockdown period. We're really fortunate to have our actual panel called Prime Connect that has a capacity for 10,000 listeners across our 4 stations. And within there, we're able to understand behavior and sentiment in specific categories towards events or towards brands, for example, as well as the utilization of categories, brand trust. We're also able to look at actual government surveys over and above that, the media landscape, evaluating services and promotions, as well as looking at actual copy testing and ad testing within the space. However, we know that COVID-19 has had a profound impact on a number of sectors in South Africa. Specifically looking at automotive and travel, what this has really meant is with us being able to continuously be in contact with our listeners, we've actually seen the impact of it psychologically for them. And it's meant there's been a re-evaluation of their lifestyles and a reprioritization of their values and certain aspects of their lives. For them, that meant spending time with their families and friends, much like all of you, because during the initial stages of lockdown, we saw many people saying that they were looking forward to mostly spending time with their family and friends, specifically going into the festive season. Over and above that, people started reevaluating their automotive choices. There was less travel occurring. Also, over and above that, people were saying to us, well, I'm also using public transport now as I start going back to work, and there are hygiene factors, so I need to consider utilizing a different vehicle. But there has been other research that has been conducted, and within that, they've seen that many people have had a new interest in the environment because of the impact of COVID and the impact of it on society as a whole. So they've become more interested and engaged in environmental initiatives. So often looking at more fuel efficient vehicles, looking at smaller vehicles, and seeing different psychological shifts in that space as well. Over and above that, we've been able to track behavior from level 5 right down to level 2. And what we've seen from this specific aspect, that holiday plans have been impacted the most and continue to do so as well. We did see, as you can see at the bottom of this chart, is that people purchasing vehicles, we've seen this dissipate. So that means there is more propensity for vehicles to actually purchase a vehicle at this point in time. And we'll get into a bit more detail a little bit later on in this presentation. If we have a look at actual planning around the festive season, many people say to us, are people going to be going away? Can they afford to go away during the festive season? 30% of our listeners are looking on traveling and going away during the festive season, with the majority of that being local travel at 92%. Many of the individuals utilizing their own vehicles to actually travel. But what we have seen from a shifting perspective in our data, because we have tracked this data over time, and I'd like to note that this number of 30% hasn't actually changed significantly from last year. So we still have very similar propensity in terms of people traveling. But what we do have is 22% of our listeners stating that they're likely to stay at home due to reservations around COVID and the unpredictability. So many people utilizing their own vehicles to travel during this time. Air travel being quite similar to last year, at almost a quarter of our listeners actually utilizing air travel over this period of time. There are different drivers. Yes, Omesh?
It's quite interesting. So you said 30% of listeners are willing to travel locally and go on holiday, which is similar to last year, which is really, really good, which means there could be a spike over the December period where people are definitely going on holiday, using flights, accommodation, car hire, and those type of facilities.
Most certainly, Omesh. I think there's going to be a lot more last minute booking as well during this period. People have waited till now, I believe, because they were uncertain about, is there another lockdown that's going to occur? Can I actually waste my money at this point in time, or afford to waste my money, or put it on the back burner again? With many people actually saying that this is the one and only thing they've been looking forward to doing that entire year, as well as taking this time to spend time with their family on holiday. So what we have seen in terms of a shift is many people saying that they're going to be staying with their friends or family when they go away, as opposed to when they were saying they would stay at hotels usually. And within hotels, we're also seeing the shift because people are uncertain around regulations, possible hygiene factors, also with their children in tow. What do they do with them? Are there going to be continuous COVID screening processes? So to alleviate some of that psychological burden that comes with this continuous COVID reminder if they do stay with their family and friends or in a self-catering chalet or apartment. So that's one of the shifts that we've seen in our data. With most of the local travel looking at KZN and the Western Cape, followed by Mpumalanga. Obviously, from a Gauteng perspective and our sample perspective, we are skewed towards Gauteng and the Western Cape. So you will see more people looking to move around into these areas, but people also looking at staycations. So what am I going to do within my own province if I am staying at home? And what are the things that I can do within my own region? With my family, with my friends. Yes?
You're saying some really important things there. I mean, generally people would be wanting to travel overseas to go on holiday, but now traveling in South Africa, do you see an influx of rentals for holiday accommodation locally? Do you think a lot more people will be spending their money locally in South Africa, or do you think people are going to save it up and go later in the year, next year, sometime on holiday?
There are two schools of thought here, and it might be that people are afraid to make the actual financial commitment right now as well. But then there are people that were largely unaffected by COVID, a small portion of people from a salary perspective and earnings perspective. So they're still able to make these commitments without very little recourse occurring from a financial perspective. Then over and above that, we've got a whole lot of people that are saying to us, well, I'm rather going to wait and see this thing through a little bit because I'm a little bit cautious still. With the spike possibly occurring, maybe I'm going to hold back. But there is an opportunity from a specials perspective where people are looking for travel specials. And we're seeing that with our listeners in particular. And what's quite interesting about our listeners is we've got 50% of them indicating that they're looking at traveling abroad or they have traveled abroad and they're planning to do so in the near future for a holiday. So many people are going to be on the lookout for a special at this point in time, with destinations being around the United Kingdom, United States, France, and Mauritius. And what's quite interesting, when our listeners were actually booking these holidays over the lockdown period, or just before the lockdown period rather, most of them were actually using travel agents at that point in time. Just, I think it's the ease and the convenience of it all. And many of them actually got refunds. Almost 7 out of 10 of these listeners actually stated that they were able to get a refund during this time. So if we look at top of mind awareness and how it's quite linked to consideration, we can see that Emirates was considered most highly by our listeners in terms of airlines. We are seeing different consideration factors, but Emirates traditionally has spent a significant amount of money on radio. So there is a high correlation between spend and top of mind consideration here. And we see BA as well, and Qatar actually making its way to the top in terms of consideration for our listeners.
Melissa, Qatar is one of my favorite airlines. I love Qatar Airways, and I know the Qatar Airways team are on as well. One of the best airlines. We're lovely to see you back in our skies. Now, is it something people want to do? Do they want to travel overseas? What is the safety factor, Melissa? What are our listeners saying about traveling overseas? Are they comfortable with that?
Well, we do have a significant amount of our listeners stating that they do want to travel overseas. There is a little bit of reluctance, like I've stated, around the financial kind of investment and the unpredictability of COVID right now, also around the actual health and safety perspective of it. And when they actually do start considering airlines right now, they're looking at price as their one driver, which I find quite interesting because generally price is quite a hygiene factor and we don't see it being most important to our listeners in a lot of categories at this point in time, but we've seen the resurgence of price into the airline category right now. But what we're starting to notice is service is becoming equally important. And this is not just in the airline category, but we're also all the travel category alone. And we're starting to see it in a number of categories where really we're looking at service as a key differentiating factor right now. But over and above that, hygiene is becoming a really important driver in the category, as well as flexibility in bookings. And it's not going to be just in this category alone. We're starting to see with South Africans really as a whole that they're expecting a lot of flexibility and convenience in their solutions due to the unpredictability of COVID right now. As we start to reevaluate what our priorities are in these various categories, we're going to see the resurgence of many consumer journeys, and it's going to become increasingly more difficult for us to start planning out these journeys, but we need to look at the correct media channels in which to reach these consumers. So just moving along into the transport category and really just looking at vehicles as a whole, What we did start to see is people reevaluating how they travel and who they travel with 47% of our listeners saying that they're less likely to carpool at the moment due to COVID. So we've seen the consideration for smaller vehicles actually start to increase in the category, because people, whether they carpooled or used public transport, are now looking at purchasing smaller vehicles to alleviate this COVID threat, for example. And 27% of our listeners agree that they're less likely to visit dealerships due to COVID. So we've also seen an openness to using digital channels. So this is why I said we need to reconsider the differentiation that we're starting to see in the consumer journeys across the different categories, because we have more information available to us. We're researching categories more, and we're starting to use digital channels more frequently as well, alongside our traditional media.
Melissa,
Over and about, yes,
at the start of COVID in around March, there was
yes.
a very big push around eco-sustainability. We saw that the canals of Venice were running clear. There were dolphins back in the canals there. We looked at the cloud cover over Wuhan, where they had their first lockdown. It was clear skies. The nature was taking over again, and there was this big move about sustainability, about using a lot of petroleum and things like that. Are people looking at eco-friendly cars that are friendly to the environment?
Most certainly, Omesh, and that's where we're seeing people trade down to something that's more eco-friendly from a fuel perspective. So what we've seen traditionally with our database is that most of our listeners start trading up to larger cars, because we have at least 63% of our listeners are part of younger families or families where they have to still cart around their children. But what we've started to see with COVID is people starting to reevaluate their environments and saying, I want to make an informed, empowered decision where I have a positive impact on my surroundings. So we're seeing also the resurgence of small vehicles into the space. It doesn't mean that they're trading down. It just means that they're making a more environmentally conscious decision as well. Further to this, we've also seen many of our listeners purchasing vehicles over this period, or looking to purchase vehicles, with 32% of our listeners saying that they're extremely likely to consider purchasing vehicles within the next 12 months. Over and above that, people, like we said, are more conscious about the purchases that they make at the moment, with 55% of our listeners saying that they purchased pre-owned vehicles and 45% saying that they've purchased new vehicles. This figure is not new for us, though. We've seen this kind of number over the past 3 years. It's been quite stable. So quite a nice, almost even split between new and pre-owned for our listeners, with the majority of them actually purchasing petrol derivatives. So yes, they're going to start moving into this environmentally conscious space. So there are opportunities to speak about moving out of the petrol space, for example. So yeah, it does offer automotive a different opportunity, with most of them purchasing their vehicles from dealerships, for example, and over and above that, most of the vehicles are financed. However, what I did find interesting, and this number has not really moved over the past 3 years, 40% of our listeners purchase their vehicles using cash.
Cash, 40%. Melissa, that's a lot of money. Wow.
That's exactly what I thought, Omesh, and it was quite an astounding number to see. And it actually has stayed stable. So I'd say with the tracking data that we have, it is quite consistent. Yeah, the first time I did see it, I was like, this can't be for real. But yeah, we've tested it a number of times now.
Which basically means somebody's going to walk into the dealership with 7 bags of cash and say, I'd like that BMW.
Possible, but there are going to be a number of them that still need to be financed. So there's still an opportunity for actual financing in this space. But what we have seen that has changed with our listeners is actually the amount of kilometers that they're traveling over the past 3 years. And we've actually seen it increase, and people are starting to travel more.
I mean, during the lockdown, I drove to the Cedarburg. So I'm one of those people that spent more kilometers in my car than I did in the normal driving around Cape Town. So I can attest to that. My mileage in my car has increased dramatically over lockdown, because I kind of felt like I needed to be out of my home. I needed to go somewhere. So I've done the trips to Hermanus, and I've done the trips to the Cedarburg and to Platt and those other places. Why? Because I needed to get out of the environment. So we're going to see a lot more people using their car traveling, which means there's a likelihood for people to wanting to service their cars as well. And I know that Sven is here from Bosch. So what's the likelihood of people wanting to use their cars to travel locally in comparison to airlines, in comparison to using the bus, Melissa?
Well, we've certainly seen from the previous slides as well that our listeners are most likely to utilize their own vehicles over the festive season. So there's really an opportunity for these brands such as Bosch to communicate with them about maybe coming to get their cars checked there, getting their service done, for example. So there is that opportunity to communicate with them right now. And over and above that, we do know that they are going to probably be putting in a couple of extra kilometers. So it's important to be there to remind them and remain top of mind. But when we look at actual drivers to vehicle purchase, we also seen price playing a significant role in a number of categories. What we have started to see is that quality is becoming more important in this category. But what we have seen that's quite similar to the other categories that we've shown you before here, as well as the travel category, is around service and the differentiation. Once again, in service, the service being the sales service process, as well as the after sales process, but brand trust playing a significant role once again. What we also note, and what I mentioned to you also within the travel category, is that people are starting to do a significant amount of research within the various categories. But there's still this need to visit the dealership, despite the fact that we saw a couple of people not wanting to actually go into the dealerships. We still see people wanting to go into the dealership, and the one and only driver here really is to test drive that vehicle as well. So what we note here is websites are being utilized readily along with the manufacturer websites. So this speaks to the consumer journey, but I do believe there are different consumer journeys here. And why I say this is we're starting to see people who don't actually want to test drive the vehicle due to COVID and fears around COVID right now and going out and about. I mean, a lot of us have become hermits. I, for one, have become that person. I order everything and I very rarely go out. So I do like to do things from the comfort of my home. So my consumer journey has changed significantly in a number of categories. So for me, it's not a one size fits all approach right now, and we have to be cognizant of this. And there are going to be varying journeys. So this person over here is likely to go online more frequently to experience your vehicle from a different perspective, or you may have to take the test driving experience to their home or their office or whatever it might be, depending on their needs.
So Melissa, I was just thinking, during those months, everybody was at home and online. How has that mirrored from a radio point of view, as in you hear an ad on the radio, then you go online onto your tablet or to your laptop or your cell phone, and then you start looking at cars. I mean, I was one of those people where I had to touch and feel the car. I wanted to feel the leather seats, but now with COVID, I'm quite comfortable looking at a car online, getting all the details, going to one of those compare websites and comparing whether it's fuel economy, whether it has torque control and this and this and this. I'm talking about stuff that I don't really know because I actually had to go Google what torque control is, let's be honest. But I got to learn a lot. I got to learn a lot because every time I had an ad, I went onto line and I had a look at what was on offer, but my only way to compare it was comparing to something else, comparing a BMW to a Mercedes or different variations between BMWs and that kind of thing. The likelihood of us, inverted commas, test driving online, is that something in the future that's going to change the car industry?
I'm sure it is, Amish. And I mean, many of our listeners are quite comfortable with completing a new car purchase online. And you can see from this graph over here, with many of them stating that they're quite happy to do an online purchase, pay the deposit, confirm delivery date, etc. I think also with the emergence of AR and VR, we're going to have some opportunities for vehicle manufacturers to really get out there and be innovative in terms of allowing people to experience vehicles in a different way. However, there are those people that are still tactile. And we see it also in the FMCG space where people are like, I just want to touch and feel stuff. So you're going to have those different groups of actual consumers, not a homogeneous variable, not a one size fits all approach once again. And we actually have to look at those different needs. But from our listeners, we see there is an openness during lockdown to people making that purchase online. Many of them, once again, stating it's purely for convenience. And what's quite interesting is the second vehicle. You can buy it at your own time. And we've seen this coming up in a lot of categories. So people want to own their own space at this point in time and own their own time and redefine their time and take their time to actually make the decision and not feel pressured from a salesperson or someone on a sales floor. over and above that, they do believe that the process may be faster and there is more flexibility in it for them. But for those who aren't willing to make this purchase, they really feel that it is a big ticket purchase, item purchase, and also that it's actually quite expensive. Just for them to go and make this rash decision. So they want to still have that highly involved decision-making process and be involved in the categories. So you're going to have those less involved people now and more involved people on the other side of the spectrum. Over and above that, many people feel it's risky and they're quite afraid of scammers in this space as well. And they also like the face-to-face engagement and the personal experience of actually experiencing the whole sales process. So quite polarized that we do have these two types of shoppers at this point in time. But what we note really is, what role does radio have to play in this space right now? And we've seen that radio creates an uplift of at least 50% for some categories when combined effectively with digital. So it's about reminding them along the purchase decision journey of the actual product, and we can utilize radio in this space effectively. In order to do so and actually understand your measurement of impact of your radio investment, we have an attribution model called, and it's powered by Veritone. And over here, you can actually measure your engagement in the digital space in terms of your online traffic. Further to this, if we look at this, this is an example from an automotive brand, and we saw an uplift of 21.1% in visits that were attributed to radio, which is 10.6 times higher than the global benchmark of 2%.
Wow, that's amazing, Melissa.
Yeah, so it was an amazing campaign. And over and above that, what we were able to see is also understand which radio stations were more effective in driving visits. And what we can see, 702 and 947 delivered more visits for this actual campaign. And over here, we can actually look at the days that were more effective as well. We can also test your creative, which we don't have in here, and show you which creative is more effective. But over here, we can see that Wednesday and Friday delivered more visits for this actual ad.
So Melissa, this is such a good way to judge how your campaign's working. And we offer this free to all of our advertisers. So as long as you have a recorded commercial, we can judge 8 minutes on either side of the commercial, plugged into Google Analytics, and get you an idea or a presentation like this. So it's really cool to see car sales matched up with how many people going to the website and how many people communicating. Am I right?
Yeah, and over and above that, we can even tell which time of day is more effective. And here we could see morning and midday showed the highest propensity for our listeners to respond to the various day parts. So that's Veritone. Yeah, exactly. So, so this is Veritone in a very small nutshell. I mean, I have Deborah here on the panel as well with me if you want to have more information around it. And we're willing to share some examples with you as well and explore this with you if you have a campaign in which we can do this. As long as there is a strong call to action and a digital component, we can do this. But yes, that's us in a nutshell from an attribution model perspective. I am going to hand over to my colleague Kagiso as well. During lockdown, like we said, we've faced a number of challenges in terms of understanding the headspace of our listeners right now. And what we've really seen is a number of changes psychologically as well, and in terms of listening behavior. Many of our clients saying to us, what is actually happening from a listener perspective? As you know, with RAMs, it's not actually happening at the moment. So in the absence of RAMs, we're put into place listener panels and tracking the various levels of COVID and behavior. And Kagiso is going to take you through those listener behavior patterns, and she'll chat to that a little bit more now.
Great, thank you. So welcome, Kagiso. Lovely to have you.
Thank you. I had technical issues there, but I'm back.
It's all good. It's all good. Kagiso, tell us all the exciting news.
Okay, let me share my screen.
Sure. While Kagiso shares the screen, I just want to let everybody know that we have our 10,000 panel respondent survey, which is called Prime Connect, and it is available free of charge to any one of our clients. So if you're an advertiser with us and you'd like to know more about our audiences and how they can relate to you, please contact any one of the team from Durban, Joburg, or Cape Town, and we can assist you with that. So talking about listener behavior during lockdown, over to Kagiso.
Thank you so much, Umesh. So in this section, I'll be talking about how our listeners listen to the radio, their behavior during the different levels of lockdown. So firstly, we wanted to know if our listeners are still listening to the radio. And 36% of them stated that they were listening to the radio more during lockdown. And it makes sense as most people were working from home. And the great thing about radio is that you can listen to it in the background while you're still working. 44% of them state that they didn't change their listening behavior during lockdown, while our listeners also stated that they have increased their online and radio streaming by 25%. Podcast usage also increased by 20%. We'll also look at which days of the week our listeners listen to the radio and also from which device. So as we can see here, most of our listeners listen to the radio on weekdays, which makes sense as they're driving to work, dropping kids off at school. And also we can see here that weekend listening is not that high. However, 43% of our listeners state that they listen to the radio every day of the week. And looking at devices, we can see that in-car radio listening increased throughout the different levels of lockdown. So we see a significant increase from level 5 to level 3. And on level 3, the government had eased down lockdown restrictions, more and more people going back to the office, and grade 7 and grade 12 pupils around this time were going back to school. And then you also see a further increase of in-car listening from level 3 to level 2. And around level 2, more industries were opening up. So the tobacco industries, gyms were opening up, and also art galleries and museums. So that could have contributed to the in-car radio listening. We also see that normal AM and FM radio listening stayed consistent throughout the different levels of lockdown. Mobile device listening also stayed consistent throughout the different levels of lockdown. What we see here is that TV radio listening decreased from level 5 to level 2. And we see that also laptop or PC device listening also stayed consistent throughout the different levels of lockdown. Lastly, looking at listening patterns, we see that listening patterns are starting to normalize as more and more people are going back to the office and they're going back into routine. We see that there's a peak around breakfast, around in the morning, and that is because more people are driving to work, they're dropping off kids at school. Interesting enough, we see a peak around 12 to 1, and that is when most people are having lunch. So they tune into radio to hear the latest news updates and also to keep in touch with what is happening in the country and around the world. We also see another peak from 3 to 4, and that is when most people are driving back home, they're picking up kids from school. So that is why we see a peak around this time. And then just looking at the key insights. So what is important to our listeners and what drives them to listen to a certain radio station? So news and information are quite important to our listeners around this pandemic. We also see that listening patterns are starting to normalize as people return to their normal schedules, and in-car listening is up, as already mentioned, as when more industries are opening up, people are going back to the office. Lastly, looking at our listeners' headspace, listeners are still concerned about their personal finances, the economy, job losses, and their mental health. So this is quite important for them. And this type of content is also important to them at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kokiso. So it's quite interesting to see that during lockdown level 5, that our listeners were actually listening to the radio via their televisions, which is on the DSTV platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so it basically meant what happened. I mean, this is my summation, and correct me if I'm wrong. If you were listening at work in pre-COVID, your work PC or your work radio would have been transferred to your DSTV device, listening into a radio via that. And when it normalized, you've gone back to your car and back to your not in office listening, but via your PC. So we've kind of normalized our daytime listenership as well. Back to pre-COVID levels, you say, Kakiso?
Yes, you're correct. So when more people are listening to the radio, like pre-COVID, it was mostly on your PC or your laptop. And during lockdown, it's most people also home. They had access to their TV, so they're listening to the radio on the TV, DSTV. So that is why we saw an increase in level 5. But from level 3 to level 2, more and more people also going back to work. That is why we're seeing a decrease. But we're also seeing now they're listening that when there was a decrease in TV radio listenership, we saw an increase in in-car listening. So I think what you said made perfect sense.
Perfect. Thank you, Kokiso. So Melissa, looking at the way things are going at the moment, do we feel that more people are going to be traveling from our listener profile locally which means there's an opportunity for local airlines, local hotels, different holiday rental places to actually come on board and make sure that our listeners are well informed about where to go, their hygiene protocols. And I think that was a very key thing that the takeout was 68% of our listeners wanted to know whether it was safe to travel. So maybe there's an opportunity for our clients to tell listeners that they do sanitize, that the environment is clean, and there is social distancing. Do you think a campaign on hygiene is more important compared to price?
Well, yes and no, and certainly hygiene is a consideration factor. So I say there are a number of drivers, but I'd say yes, communicating about hygiene is very important. But we've also seen humor works really well in the category of travel, for instance. And if you are in the radio space, it's important to have a strong narrative and storyline when you do actually communicate with the audience and make it a little bit fun right now. We've had a lot of serious information. So if we can look at that going forward, I think that would be great.
Is there any info on how special holidays are performing? I mean, I remember having, in fact, one of our panelists here, Danica, who's from Travel Check, dialing in from Germany. We actually had Easter together, but via laptops. And that was the special holiday that was Easter. And then we got into June 16th, Youth Day, and then we got into Bride Day, which was a little bit relaxed. How are people going to be responding to Christmas this year and New Year?
Yeah, so like we saw, Umesh, we're still seeing very similar levels for people traveling over the festive season to last year. So not a massive differentiation. So the performance is still there. We do have more of an appetite for people wanting to look at specials going forward and looking at the fact that they want to pre-book holidays. So there's an opportunity during Black Friday, for instance, to get specials out there. I really do believe there's a significant opportunity.
Great. And I mean, it's quite pleasing to see that a new airline's launching on the 10th of December called Lift Airlines. I know they're actually advertising with us now. So it's really good to see the tourism sector picking up. And I know that Airlink as well has some really cool stuff happening with us on our channels as well. Great to see that. If there's any questions that you would like to ask Kagiso and Melissa, please pop them into the chat box. I see a number of questions coming up. One of the questions, what kind of creative messaging do you think will work for these sectors during this time, especially in the luxury retail car sector? Melissa?
So, Umesh, like we said, certainly we're seeing the shift towards people being more environmentally conscious. So definitely messages around that. A lot of people are looking for messaging around efficiency in terms of fuel efficiency as well. Those all seem very functional, and we're seeing a lot of functional messaging pulling through in the category right now. But also leveraging that brand trust that people have with your brands right now is really important, because people have less mental capacity to actually make decisions because of the fact that we've used a lot of our mental space because of COVID. And managing a trauma, it is a prolonged trauma if we look at it. It's taken up a significant amount of our actual consciousness right now. We need to be top of mind, and we need to create that brand trust still throughout this time and get those messages out about reliability, trust, and leverage those in your space.
Melissa, in our webinars, a few webinars ago, you spoke about the lipstick effect and how it affected purchasing patterns during World War II and other major events that happened in other parts of the world. How does the lipstick effect, which you explained quite beautifully, was about making yourself feel better as a person by buying perfumes and redoing your home, going to affect us going forward? Do you think people are going to want to go on holiday to make their families feel better about being locked up for so many months? Or do you think they're going to be buying a pretty new car because that'll make them feel better about themselves? Is that reality, or is it more about makeup and consumables like that?
Well, right now we can only hypothesize, right? And many people saying that they're looking at the smaller ticket items right now, but we can also imagine that people are looking for experiences and they want to redefine themselves in a different way. And like we said, people are starting to reevaluate their priorities. So what is it that they really want? And they're looking for experiences with their families and friends. So speaking to that travel aspect again. And also, once we took away everybody's freedom, what was the first thing they said? They couldn't wait to get out of their houses. And I know you, Umesh, you were one of those people as well. Me too. And then when you gave it back to me, I was like, I don't know what to do with this thing. But the point is, when we took away that freedom, people have now reevaluated it and they're looking for those experiences. And I really believe that we're going to see an upsurge of this in the new year. We just need to get past this blip. Where people are a little bit more cautious. And those, like I said, when we look at global segmentation with those upper end segments, we see high spending propensity there, and it still remains. They're still going to purchase into those luxury segments. We're not going to see a lot of shifting there, but people who were impacted significantly from a financial perspective during lockdown, those smaller segments at the bottom end of the funnel, they're going to certainly be more cautious. And you'll see different ticket items there, those smaller ticket items, like I said, like a chocolate, or might be cosmetics or fragrances, whatever it is that's within their frame of reference from an affordability perspective.
Thank you. Well, if you have any questions, you're welcome to pop it into the chat box. The presentation will be available to everyone. We will share that to everyone. And also, we would like to let you know that we have our respondent panel of Prime Connect, which is available to you free of charge, especially during these COVID times. The research that we provide is so key for you to get to your consumer in the best way possible and to understand what their needs are. I mean, there was interesting things that Melissa spoke about, is about price sensitivity when it came to airlines. Melissa, I was looking at tickets to go overseas. Yes, I was feeling like I need to go somewhere. And I realized that when you have fewer flights, you have more expensive tickets. And when you have more flights, it becomes so much easier to actually get better deals. So it's interesting, you know, when you talk about a better flight. So we want more airlines to come into the country. We want more flights. We want to get better prices. We want to travel again. We want to get out of our comfort zone. And Prime Connect is a great way for you to actually look at how we chat to our listeners and how they respond to us and what they feel and what they like. And you can appeal to them specifically. The attribution model is something amazing that you could use to actually see how your campaign is being planned out. Remember, if you want the presentation, it's available on our sales portal. Go to primemediabroadcasting.co.za and all the information will be there. Alexia, just correct me if I'm wrong on that. Just pop it into the chat box so we can get you the link to how everybody can download the presentation. And also, it's a special day today. We would like to wish Aileen from No Menu a very, very happy birthday. I mean, we are in radio and we can do that. So happy birthday to Aileen from all of us at Prime Media Broadcasting. Remember, as we said, the presentation will be available to you, and Alexia is going to pop it into the box. So you can actually click on the link and go directly there to download it from your laptop. And it is primemediabroadcasting.co.za. We have a lot of different information there. Our listener insights, there's decks from Melissa, information from that, and you can download it all there. So we would like to say thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar. I think it's going to be the last one we have, Melissa, this side of the year. And we would like to say to everyone that's joined us in the number of webinars that we've had in the previous few months, we appreciate all the time and effort. We hope that we added value in your life, in your business life, and gave you some insight on how you can better speak to our listener. Whatever we can do to make sure that you are successful, we are willing to do that. So contact anyone within our sales department to make sure that you, as our valued client, manage to float through the troubled waters, and we're there for you as well. So as a final goodbye, thank you so much, Kakiso, for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And to my wine online drinking buddy, Melissa Mcnally, thank you so much for joining us. Deborah, our Chief Strategy Officer, we appreciate your time and effort for being with us today. And Deborah, we will have to send some wine directly to your home to say thank you for all of the time and effort that you've made to ensure that these were successful. So thank you for.
I love this, Amish. Thank you. I love where this is going.
So thank you, Deborah, and Alexia, Nevin, and Gary, Tish, and the rest of the team, including Lizelle. We appreciate all the time and effort that you've made this year to make sure that we're able to communicate to all of our clients effectively. Next year, stay tuned to something absolutely beautiful, bright and new. I've said it, Alexia. We're going to make it happen. Have a beautiful festive yes, absolutely. A beautiful breakfast. Stop, pause, rethink. Have a beautiful festive season. Remember, Black Friday is upon us. If you want some great deals, contact anyone at the sales team. Let's make sure we all navigate these waters and come out successfully. Have a beautiful weekend. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.